Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fernand Carteiser. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the European Conservatives and Reformist ECR. It is my pleasure this evening to welcome a few guests here, eminent guests, to talk with them and with you about the issue of freedom of speech. On my right is Michael Shellenberger, an American journalist, intellectual who has published many books and who is really renowned for his work on freedom of speech, but also on questions related to environmental issues. He is a special guest and worldwide renowned, as I told you. Then we have Georgia du Plessis, who is coming from South Africa. She's a legal expert. She has been studying in the United States. She was teaching at the Université Catholique de Louvain, if I'm not wrong, here in Belgium. And she has, her work is concentrated on issues such as freedom of religion also, and of course, freedom of speech, which is our subject today. Rob Roos, our next guest, is from the Netherlands. He's a former member of the European Parliament, an entrepreneur who is really active in a wide array of different subjects, also economic subjects, and who has a very pronounced interest also on the Digital Services Act, which actually is one of the main components of the discussions that we are going to lead today. As a former MEP, he was working actually on the Digital Services Act, and he brings a lot of practical experience. Maybe before we turn to you, Michael, and your activities on freedom of speech, I would like to ask you, Georgia, about the legal concerns that you might have for the moment when it comes to the issue of freedom of speech. So as a lawyer, what is your main concern perhaps with the Digital Services Act that we apply here in the European Union?
Thank you very much. I would say the biggest concern that we see as lawyers with regards to religious freedom rights or the right to freedom of expression is the application of very broad and undefinable concepts like the notion of hate speech and disinformation. And those are very subjective concepts, and whoever is in power for the day will be those who will say what will be hate speech and what will be disinformation. And these are concepts used in the Digital Services Act, and concepts like these will not pass muster under the international human rights limitations to the right to freedom of religion or freedom of expression.
So would you, as a legal expert, would you consider that our society is still a free society, considering the doubts that you have now on the Digital Services Act, for instance? Are we living in a free society?
I think we are living in a somewhat free society, freer than other countries, but I do think that it is under major threat, and that the spaces for free speech, for freedom, for having a well-balanced democracy where everyone can give their opinion, that space is shrinking under definitions like disinformation and hate speech.
Thank you very much. Rob, you have been working on this Digital Services Act, and you have now heard Georgia and her concerns and that our freedom is shrinking. Is that also the analysis that you would make after having been in contact with that issue for several years?
Yes, absolutely. The Digital Services Act, but it has also two good things. Maybe I should start with that too. One of the things is that that illegal content has to be removed within 24 hours, and that is good. Real illegal things has to be removed, but But also there is no possibility to send personalized content to minors, and I think that's a good thing. But there it ends. It's really dangerous when governments are going to determine what is the truth and what is not the truth. The governments are just human beings like you and me, and we cannot trust them. Our system is not based on trust. Our system is based on checks and balances and oversight. So there must be something different than a government who is saying what we have the right to say. And it was also meant to be to fight foreign interference, but we see now that this law is fighting their own people, the unwilling opinions of people who disagree with the governments. And well, this is the basis of a healthy democracy. So we need that. People should speak out. And for me, the border where we can draw a line is that calling for violence, you know. But for the rest, free speech is not meant to be to protect the sweet words. Freedom of speech is meant to be to say the things that other people don't want to hear. And there is another thing, and that is during a crisis, the Commission can determine the narrative. So they can push through the big tech companies what the people should hear. And this is also a dangerous development, because during a crisis, and we have seen that during COVID, we need more free speech. We need a real debate. So it gives the Commission an awful lot of power, and I think that is not good. We need more free speech for a healthy democracy.
Thank you. Michael, you have heard that we have a lot of concerns in Europe for the time being. I mean, we have legal concerns, we have political concerns with the Digital Services Act. What is your reaction to this? What is your interest in this discussion about the Digital Services Act?
Well, I share the concerns. I mean, you should have big concerns around this legislation. This is sweeping censorship law that you've got already in place in Europe that is on the verge of being enforced in ways that are very frightening to us as Americans. The ambition is to censor the entire internet. We've seen this repeatedly around the world, Australia, Ireland, Brazil. We see attempts to not just censor what people see here, but what they see everywhere. So obviously that concerns me as an American, but as somebody that loves Europe, that loves the tradition of free speech which comes out of Europe, this is extremely alarming stuff. And I think, as you were saying, Rob, the solution to misinformation is accurate information. The solution to misinformation is never censorship. Censorship never solves for misinformation. If you have wrong information out there, you need to produce the accurate information. If you create little committees of supposed experts to quietly stifle debate, first of all, it's not going to work. You're going to destroy the public's trust. Everybody wants to know, what are you hiding there, with good reason. And this gets to the final point, which is that who has been the purveyor of the worst episodes of misinformation in recent years? It's been the governments. They said that the COVID vaccine would prevent you from becoming infected. They said that they knew for sure that COVID came from a wet market in China. Most US intelligence agencies now think it came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the town where it came from. We've seen claims that that I have helped to debunk, claims such as climate change will make it impossible to grow food, or that it will cause the apocalypse, none of which is in any United Nations plan. So for me, I look at this and I think, this is about control, this is about power, and this is about domination. This has absolutely nothing to do with false information, because we know what the solution to false information is, and that's accurate information.
May I ask you, Michael, because also the audience is certainly aware that you have been instrumental in the Twitter files. You know, you have also discovered and described the kind of censorship that had been made on Twitter. And what is your take on this? I mean, what kind of experience would you like to share with us from that experience with the Twitter accounts?
One of the first things that we discovered is that there were actual blacklists. That's not an exaggeration or a euphemism on my part. There's a blacklist. One of the gentlemen on that blacklist is named Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He's one of the most respected epidemiologists in the world at Stanford University. And talk about misinformation. When the COVID pandemic began, he and a scholar from Harvard University, a scholar from Oxford University, all came out and said that the most important thing is to protect the vulnerable and allow society to remain functioning, because otherwise you're going to deprive children of an education, children who are really nearly completely invulnerable from the virus. They were censored for that. The US government, Anthony Fauci and his colleagues aggressively tried to spread misinformation about that approach. That was the standard approach that governments had agreed to before the pandemic began. When the pandemic did begin, they came out and said, this is what we need to do. So that was the first thing that we discovered. But then there was something else that happened that was even more terrifying, is that we started seeing requests from the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, which is the agency that was created after 9/11 attacks to fight terrorism, they were demanding censorship by Twitter. We discovered an illegal election interference operation by the FBI and the Aspen Institute, which is a US government-funded think tank, similar to Atlantic Council in Europe, that was running an illegal information operation to spread disinformation, claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Well, why do I say it's disinformation? The difference between disinformation and misinformation is that you know it's a lie. Misinformation is that you might be wrong. We know that the FBI knew that the laptop was not Russian and that it was actually Hunter Biden's laptop because they had the laptop in December of 2019. So if you've heard this story before, people need to understand that there was a conspiracy, a proven conspiracy, by which I mean an illegal and secret effort by the FBI to spread disinformation about this laptop. They basically brainwashed Facebook and Twitter executives. Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, has since apologized for censoring this. So this is a very classic pattern where you'll see these actors first spreading disinformation and then demanding censorship of the accurate information on the basis of that disinformation.
Speaking of legality and illegality, I would like to ask both of you a question on the extraterritoriality of the DSA. Because actually we have seen recently that the Commissioner Breton, who has now in the meantime resigned, he's not anymore a member of the Commission, but he had threatened Elon Musk not to publish different things, and if not, maybe there would be legal consequences. So actually, the European Union has acted in a way to tell to an owner of a platform located in the United States what to do or not to do. What is your legal stance on this? And then, Michael, how do you react as an American citizen to this?
Well, I think it's a complete overreach of power of the European Commission to tell other countries what they should do. The nature of the DSA is that it applies across 27 member states, and those 27 member states must, their laws must comply with the Digital Services Act and must all be in line with the Digital Services Act. But because of the nature of big tech companies or of very large online platforms is, of course, that they are international, that they do not only apply in the 27 member states. So the consequences of an act like the Digital Services Act will automatically be that it will impact and censor speech not only in the European Union, but that it will impact the very large online platforms and search engines outside of the EU as well, because many of them come from outside of the EU. And they have to be although the DSA applies inside of the EU, the consequences is that it will affect free speech outside of the EU as well.
And I had the feeling, Michael, that in the US Senate there was a lot of anger also about this, what has been perceived as an illegal act from the European Commission towards the American judicial system and maybe to the Constitution. What was your reaction, Michael?
Well, I mean, I think you all know that we Americans are very sensitive about our free speech rights. It was a big part of, we had a Constitution, and then right afterwards there was a demand, including by Thomas Jefferson, that we have a Bill of Rights and that the first thing be freedom of speech. They insisted on it. So our whole country, in many ways, it is the foundational platform of the United States of America. So to have a European demand, and this is a specific case, he sent a letter warning Elon Musk that his conversation with Donald Trump could violate European law. Put it mildly, that did not sit well with many Americans. Musk posted a rough, I would say, meme in response, but I think it did express the feeling that we had here. But look, we've seen this everywhere, and this is why we keep seeing a coordinated effort around the world: Ireland, Brazil, Canada, European Union, Australia, New Zealand. Yeah, Brazil. I mean, what's going on? You know, you have the feeling, and we keep seeing involvement of intelligence agencies. We see involvement of think tanks that are linked together, similar strategies. We're going to let the news organizations decide what's true and false, and then we're going to have these little secret committees full of people that basically are just are censoring on the basis of current opinion. Well, if we do that, then We would never have known that the Earth revolves around the sun, that the Earth is round, that it was an asteroid rather than volcanoes that made the dinosaur extinct. Free speech is the platform on which our civilizations run. It's an idea that came out of Europe. Now, granted, it came in a different way. It was petitioning the king for more rights of free speech. It's different here than there, but this is where this idea of free speech came from. And to see totalitarian proposals like this coming from the heart of the European Union, it sets off alarm bells, both as an American who loves my country, but also as somebody that loves Europe. We love Europe. We feel it's our obligation to provide security for Europe. When you start making attacks, when Europe starts attacking freedom of speech for its own people and for us, it makes us question our commitment to the European Union, and I can't see anybody here who would want that.
That's a very good point, actually, Michael. But you are underlining the international problems that this DSA raises. But I would like to ask you, Rob, as a former, or as still a Dutch politician with a lot of experience in the matter, what are the consequences on our societies? And I think specifically on the culture of denunciation that is perhaps established in our society. We have now trusted flaggers introduced by the Digital Services Act. And it reminds me a little bit of the dictatorships in Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain in the old days. Is that a picture that you would also see in this system, or do you think that the trusted flaggers actually are something harmless and are not affecting so much our way of living together in our societies?
No, I see that exactly the same. Actually, for me, it's the same things that happens in Belarus, and we have always a corrected finger against tyranny and dictators, but if you step back a little bit and you look from a distance to the European Union, they are exactly doing the same. And the danger is, free speech is the very foundation of our democracy. And if you take that away, you really damage democracy. It's about the will of the people, and politicians should serve the people and should not act against the people. And it's also very dangerous, you know, because we don't know who is in power, but maybe someday an evil person can come into power, and they can also abuse this this system. And the only way to protect this is to have more free speech, because I believe in the common sense of the people. Of course, you have on the right extremists, you have on the left extremists, but in the center, the common ground is always common sense. Yes. And I think this is important, that we trust our societies. And there is a lot of knowledge. And so people with a different opinion are not always the bad ones.
But if I was now the devil's advocate, which I like to be in this case, I would say, Michael, it's good that we have now fact checkers, you know, because it's very dangerous for all of us to read things on the internet that might be misleading us, or disinformation, or manipulation, and so on. And thanks God we have now fact checkers who help us to think in the correct way. What would you answer to?
Well, I would agree, and I'm a journalist, I'm a working journalist, that's how I make my living. I spend every day fact checking. That's what being a journalist is. So the answer is, we have had fact checkers for hundreds of years in our countries. They're called the newspapers, the news media. It includes independent journalists. Journalism is something that anybody can do. It's available to anybody. The problem is not the fact checkers. The problem is the state-sponsored fact checkers. That's how you get George Orwell's Ministry of Truth, where it's not the truth, it's the state, it's the government propaganda. So these trusted flag checkers, when people hear the term trusted flag checkers, I think it's important that you actually hear state propaganda, government approved propaganda. Science can't progress that way. That's a recipe for totalitarianism. We need to have free and open debates about these things, and particularly in a crisis. When do you need to have a full debate about it? It's when you have a pandemic. That's when you need to have a debate. Or a country invades another country. We need to have a conversation in our societies. People sometimes say things like dictatorships are much faster, or it's much more convenient. It's actually not true. Democracy is much more responsive to real world problems because you get a lot of debates, a lot of questions out there in the open. What they're pursuing in Europe has nothing to do with concern for the truth. It's about control and power, and it should alarm everybody that loves freedom in the world. When you see the cradle of Western civilization and free speech using 1984 as a guidebook rather than as a warning, you're in a bad place as a civilization. And the only thing I'm glad in the Twitter files, we've also had the Facebook files, we've had the YouTube files because there's been congressional investigations. It gave us all the warning that we should need. To know that this DSA and the implementation of it should alarm Europeans. They should be in the streets furious at the idea that this tradition of free speech, which grew slowly over hundreds of years, but which is so precious and valuable to us, it's the platform for our democracy and for the progression of science, that it's under attack. And it's being under attack by the European Union.
And I have the feeling that it is invented and implemented without the participation of the people. Because when we look at the international scene, actually, we see that often decisions are taken on OECD level or on G7 level and then implemented in the countries without really consulting the local people or even national parliaments. Is that an impression that you would share also?
Well, I mean, it's not your Uber driver and your taxi driver who's demanding that people be censored. It's not the person that works at the grocery store or is the nurse in the hospital. It's the intellectuals at the universities. It's the journalists. It's the government officials. It's the elites of our society demanding the right to control what the people can hear. Absolutely. I mean, where do you see this coming from? You see it coming from the World Economic Forum in Davos, the richest people in the world wanting ever more control over what people think and do. We see it coming from the European Union. We see it coming from the United Nations. It's not there's no grassroots movement demanding censorship. Please, we want the government to silence us. Can you imagine? So it's really disturbing. I think it shows how much the elites distrust, and I would go so far as to say really hate the publics because they disobeyed them. They keep electing whatever you think of populism or nationalism and right-wing, left-wing, whatever, and there's now a left-wing populist party in Germany, by the way. Whatever you think of that, it's the will of the people. I mean, this is the whole point of why we're not slaves anymore. We're not serfs anymore. It's democracy. So you've got some elites in power who are in the same panic that the Catholic Church was in when Martin Luther and the Protestants got a hold of the printing press. They're having the same panic. They're on the same losing side of history. But obviously, many years went by of efforts by the church and others to censor people.
To sum this up, I would like to come back to a remark that Rob has made earlier and ask all the three of you, what should we do now with this Digital Services Act? Should we completely abolish it, or should we maybe keep parts of it that are not as bad, or can we reform it at all, or do we have to start anew? I mean, now in this situation where we have a lot of criticism and where there's a lot of public debate on the Digital Services Act, what are we going to do? What would be the best to do with that? Maybe, Georgia, you would like to start.
Well, from ADF International's perspective, we have been working on cases of censorship. And just to give you an example of Päivi Räsänen, she's a member of the Finnish parliament, and she has been to trial 3 times already. She's now in the Supreme Court of Finland. And she has, for merely posting a Bible verse on Twitter back then. And the punishment has really been in the process. And so she has been under severe pressure because of this post. And this is just to show, and the alleged crime is hate speech. Mm-hmm. And this is to show how hate speech can be used to censor people. Now, what we've been doing is we have assisted her legally, we have amplified her case, we have supported her. But I think for legislation like the Digital Services Act specifically, there is, for example, a legal avenue. There will be a review of the Act before November of 2025, where I think members of the European Parliament and member states of the Council of the European Union will have the opportunity to give feedback on this act. And I think they should be alerted to the threats to freedom of expression before this review, so that the act can be at least amended with regards to the worst threats to freedom of expression. And then also there are legal avenues at the Court of Justice of the European Union that can be taken.
Thank you very much, Rob. In your eyes, is that the way to go, the trust in the institution and in courts in order to try to make it better, or should we also have more political approach at the same time? What is your feeling about the DSA? How can we reform it?
Yeah, we should do everything we can. So the courts are very important. I also, the European Court of Human Rights is very in favor of freedom of speech, but I hope they will stick to that point of view. But politically, it is very important, because the problem with European law is when it is adopted, it's practically always there. We cannot give it, we cannot get it back. That's why I'm always in favor of national law above European law, because European law supersedes national law. And the Commission is the only one who can initiate the change. So we depend on these unelected commissioners to get our freedom of speech back, and it's really dangerous. So the work of Michael is very important. I'm very happy with Elon Musk. He is advocating and that he bought Twitter and he's advocating for freedom of speech. Your work is very important, but we all have to push to get our freedom back, because this Digital Services Act is really a censorship law.
Michael, is it a common enemy for Americans and Europeans, this Digital Services Act? Is it a common fight that we have to lead now over the next years in order to get rid of the Digital Services Act and maybe also of other acts in other countries in order to fight for freedom of speech? What is your conclusion on this debate about the Digital Services Act?
Well, I think all of us that want freedom of speech are fighting the same good cause, and it's wonderful that we have so much solidarity between countries. It's the same struggle. It's a, I dare say, spiritual, moral issue for many of us. No one wants to live in a world where you can't speak your mind. You can't be fully human without expressing your views on things. So for me, I mean, I'm not European. I'm not a policy expert. For me, I would say the European Union has no business being involved in misinformation. There's other things in the DSA around privacy and copyright and stuff like that. But we already have laws against fraud, against defamation, against child exploitation. Those laws are enforced. And if there needs to be more enforcement, that's a separate question. When you start getting governments involved in misinformation, boy, that's a dangerous step on the way towards an immediate leap into totalitarianism. We've seen this movie before. We've been warned before. Don't go there. It's really up to the people of Europe now to make their voices heard to their elected representatives.
And I would like perhaps to address myself also to the people who have been watching us now, and in the name, I think, of the four of us, ask you who are watching this debate, who are interested in the freedom of speech, fight for your rights. Don't let yourself be guided by the government. Don't trust the media. Always ask yourself what is your opinion and try to be informed from many different sources. Fight for your rights, fight for the freedom. Our democracy depends also on your personal engagement for our common values. I thank you, Rob, Georgia, Michael, for being with us now this evening, and hope to see you soon on the next occasion. Thank you very much.